So today we're going to talk about transport. So there's a slight change from the agenda that was sent out, but I think that's fine. So we'll just roll with it as we go. First things first, though, I circulated the minutes from the previous meeting. Anyone notice anything wrong with that, or any additions that want to be highlighted? Nope, cool. Any matters arising? Anything anyone wants to follow up on? Nope, cool. So announcements, that's part of the purpose of this. So there's a few bits that I've been notified about. So we'll maybe go through those. First thing, the TUC will be running Green Rep course in January. One ran an online one this last in or through October and November. I think it was fairly poorly attended. We didn't have a huge oversight of what that was, and so we're hoping to get the next one up and running in a bit of a bigger way. No details or dates for that one yet, but as and when that appears, I'll keep the group informed, and I'll send out so we can. If you've got anyone in mind who you want to take this course, then hang on to that. There's a ETUI massive online course. No, there's another O in there. MOOC, massively something online course for labor skills for labor and environmental justice. It's an online course that you follow through. It's available now, I think, but will kind of run officially through January to February. It's free, and I'll circulate the links to that if people do want to. It looks quite an interesting course. Just giving some of the kind of global context behind just transition and what we can do as trade unions. I think I will be taking it, or at least keeping an eye on it. So we'll see how that goes. We're in Yorkshire and Humber, and so Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission puts out these reports every so often for people to comment on. This transport survey, topical for today, is out. It makes various fairly baggy policy recommendations about the kind of things we should be focusing on. So if we want to tighten that up at all, then go online and do that. I've got a link that I'll send round so we can all participate if needed. On Monday, the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission is running an event called After HS2, What Transport System Does Yorkshire and Humber Need? That's online. Again, I'll circulate the links to this after today. It sounds quite interesting. It sounds like they're thinking quite holistically, and they do want it to be a bit of a debate. So as long as many of us can go along and show the trade union side would be great. We Make Tomorrow has moved. So this was going to be in December. It's moved to Saturday, the 28th of January. So if you couldn't make the December date, that's fine, because it's a different date now. It was because it clashed with some of the marches, or a march, and they didn't feel that they wanted to make people choose between them. So that's a good thing. I think it's a Sunday now, so hopefully more people can get involved with that. Again, I'll circulate the link. Greener Jobs Alliance, I think it's Greener Jobs Alliance, have put together a general motion for climate action, which has been circulated to various people. I will recirculate, but actually this is something that they're asking trade unions and trades councils to put forward in their own branches or the trades councils to kind of push up the ranks in your own unions and also in the TUC to see if we can get a proper climate change action motion at the national conferences next year. It's quite good. They are open to the idea of it being changed or adapted to local circumstances. So I will circulate that draft, and I wonder if we want to have a think about how we do that, if we want to push those locally or come up with slightly agree a particular form of wording or something that we want to get across Yorkshire and Humber On that one, I'll just pause. Yeah, Ellen, you've got your hand up, but also if anyone else has already seen it or wants to, or taken any action already there. Or you're on mute, Ellen.
Sorry, I'm not used to this platform there. Yeah, I have seen it and I was slightly involved in the formulation of it. I just wanted to say, because you were saying that you thought it came from the Greener Jobs Alliance. I can say that it was the people that worked on it together were from the Greener Jobs Alliance, the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, and PCS Union, basically. But the idea is that it's seen not as coming from any particular people or any particular group. It hasn't come out of a group, you know, it's come out of the movement, if you like. So that I think that's actually worth saying. I was planning to circulate it to the Campaign Against Climate Change and the Climate Justice Coalition respective trade union sections before this meeting, so some of you would have had it, but I'll do that just after.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I got it from someone from Greener Jobs Alliance, but the wording made me think that it wasn't just Greener Jobs Alliance. It seems to have been a group. So, but that's fine. It kind of reads a little bit like that.
They wrote, Tahir wrote the words, but
yeah,
it's a collective effort.
Right. Sure. So we can maybe have a think about that at some point. Just to finish the announcements, tonight at 6:45, there's a COP28 mobilization call, which some of you are obviously involved with already. So I'll circulate that. I'll send these things round directly after this meeting so we can all see it. We don't miss the boat. The day of action is soon, 9th of December. So, you know, timely to get on that. This Saturday, on the 2nd of December, that's this Saturday, isn't it? There's a action in Sheffield, series of stalls, which early afternoon, 12 till 3. I'll send the details of that. But again, if you want to attend or speak to them, then you can do. Is anyone involved in that? Martin, are you involved in that?
Not directly. We're supporting it. This is People's Assembly and Unite Community organised event on Energy for All.
Right. Yeah.
That's what you're referring to, I think.
It's
you know, the idea that part of the cost of living crisis, we need to ensure everyone's guaranteed access to energy, and of course, we want that to be green energy, but it's part of the climate campaign as well as a cost of living crisis campaign.
Yeah, so I mean that's happening Saturday afternoon. The following Saturday we've also is the day of action, so the global day of action for COP28. So there's a few bits happening in Leeds. There's a rally in Briggate, I never quite know how to say that, starting at 11, and then a sort of marketplace of stalls and talks at Imagine. I'll send the address to that, but it's a nice space in central Leeds, from 12:30 to 1. No, that can't be right. Maybe slightly later than that. The appeal has gone out for unions to set up stalls, arrange talks, put on activities for children, that kind of thing, leaflet ahead of it. So if you want to get involved, I think, Ellen, are you organising this, or are you the contact, or do you want to speak to it? Oh, sorry, you're unmuted again.
God, right.
Yeah,
The timing for the part of the day that's at Imagine is 12:30 to 3:30. And yeah, stalls, workshop. We are working with both the local, I mean, both the Leeds and Wakefield and Bradford Unite Community branches to do stalls on the Better Buses and the Energy for All campaigns. But what was I going to say? Yeah, anybody that wants to bring stalls or display material, who, you know, you can actually get in from 10 o'clock in the morning. It's only that we're just throwing it open to the public at 12:30. And it's worth saying on the, because I think it's worth letting people know that on the rally we have also been talking to the Palestine Solidarity campaign to, try and make it that we don't clash and that they can bring a speaker to our rally and stuff.
Cool. On that same day in Sheffield, there's a COP28 rally as well, from midday. Martin, are you involved in that?
Yeah, very much, yes. So we're assembling at Devonshire Green, just on the edge of the city centre there at 12 o'clock. We're having a few speakers there, and then at 12:30 we're setting off on a march through the city centre to come back to the City Hall, and in that space there, Barker's Pool, will have a final rally. And I think different organisations have been asked to set up stalls. But during the week preceding, we're hoping that the various different climate groups that are part of the Climate Justice Coalition will be staging different events, mainly out in the street, approaching people, with stalls and so on, leafleting, ranging from global justice to, different trade union campaigns and so on. So we're trying to make a bit of a build-up to the 9th of December as well.
Excellent. Brilliant. That sounds great. That's the end of my announcements. Has anyone got any others to add? Helen, what have you? Oh. Okay, so Debbie's just added some details into the chat there, and Helen leafleting on the 2nd from midday in Harrogate. Cool. Okay. Well, that's fine.
Yeah, if Martin could put his details, I can circulate them.
I will. I'll email this round with links directly after the meeting, so we can.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling with Teams.
That's fine. Not a wildly popular platform, apparently.
Yeah, Debbie, you're just not a team player, are you?
Oh, I think I'm the right sort of Teams player, a team player. And I'm sorry I was late.
No,
and I can only see 7 people sitting in there together. It's very odd, this platform. Maybe people have switched off their cameras so they're not sitting on the amphitheatre steps kind of thing.
Right, yeah, no, that's, I mean, this is that's a setting, so you can set people out to look like they're all together for some reason. I don't know why you'd really necessarily want to do that, but anyway, yeah. So if we crack on, so if there's no other announcements, I mean, if people think of things, then you can add things in later on, but the headline here was that we want to talk about transport and the opportunities of public transport, both for all the kind of good reasons that public transport needs to exist, but also to aid in this kind of green transition and the decarbonisation of our ways of life and ways of doing business. So to kick us off with that, Martin is going to say a few words.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, shall I go ahead? Okay, well, thanks very much, and good afternoon, all of you. I think I know a little bit about transport because I was a bus driver all my life, and I was a union rep and ended up representing the union nationally and even internationally on the International Transport Workers Federation. We did quite a lot of work on climate and green transport. So to put this into some sort of context, transport as a sector is roughly 25 to 30% producer of all total global emissions. So it's a very significant part of our economy. Obviously, that's a bigger proportion in the developed world than the less developed world, but nevertheless, 25 to 30% of global emissions come from transport. And British figures are a little bit difficult to decipher, but the EU is quite clear that across the European Union, road transport makes up 77% of the transport sector emissions. So road transport is really a very significant problem. And what we also know is that global emissions in many sectors is slightly falling, but it's not in transport. Transport is still increasing. There's not been a proper strategy to deal with this. Now, public transport clearly has a massive role to play. If we can get people out of their cars and onto buses and trains, then we at least dealing with a significant part of the road towards a green economy. But to do that, it really does mean looking at how public transport is funded and how it's organised and how it's owned. And you can't help but be political about this. I mean, if you take the example of where I worked in Sheffield, I started working on the buses in 1981 when South Yorkshire's bus network was owned by the public authority. It was a municipal organisation. It was heavily subsidised in terms of fares. And we had an increasing patronage level every year from about 1980 through till 1986 when deregulation occurred. And that's really significant because we were actually reducing traffic congestion in Sheffield by having a publicly owned, high frequency public transport system that was attractive to use, easy to use, and was available for people right throughout the day and night, you know, with an all-night bus service too. And it meant that we obviously had some very busy routes, but we also had the less busy routes, which were an integral part of the network, because unless you have full coverage across the city, then it still becomes unattractive to use the bus. If you're using the high frequency, very good service to town for your job, but you can't get on that lesser known route that goes around the suburbs to get to see your mum in the evening, well, you know what you do? You buy a car, you buy a moped, and before you know it, why am I catching the bus into town to go to work? So it really matters to have an integrated system. What happened, of course, was we then had a Tory government that believed that services like transport, but they extended this across the whole public service sector, should be run for profit. It should be run by the private sector on the basis of market forces. In other words, what's profitable will be run really well if it's run by a private company. And they promised lower fares, more services, and indeed a much better system would come out of this. And of course, we all know that the opposite is the truth. So what's been happening recently is that the deregulated network of private bus companies is really reaching the end of its existence. I mean, they've been cutting services so much, they put the fares up so much, that it now covers such a fraction of travel in our towns and cities that, you know, we wonder to what extent any future is sustainable if we carry on down this road. And meanwhile, of course, what we've seen is that traffic congestion has actually increased to a point that is even higher now than it was before COVID. And that's mainly anecdotal because it's quite difficult to get up-to-date figures on this. A lot of statistics, for instance, go back to 2021, 2022, but you can see that it's been, I think we can all experience this, the traffic congestion has been increasing. And a lot of people, I think, could be persuaded to get out of their car and get onto public transport if it was good enough. I have to say, as a union rep myself, and worked on Unite with my car manufacturing colleagues, we had a very clear view in Unite that we're not trying to just get rid of all cars. There's nothing wrong with having a car, it's the usage of it that's the issue. Let's get those cars as green as possible, but let's have a situation like I think Mercedes actually had an advert in Germany many years ago, which was actually quite pertinent to this argument. They showed this very rich gentleman walking out of his house. There's his lovely Mercedes-Benz on the driveway. He looks at it lovingly, gives it a pat, and then walks off to catch the tram into town to go to work. And I think that's quite a good message. And it reminds me of those early days of municipal ownership on the buses. I was conducting, but then eventually driving buses out into our wealthier suburbs in Sheffield, very high frequency peak transport into the city centre. And you could see wealthy people with their suits and briefcases were catching the bus and leaving their cars behind. And that's what we desperately need to get back to. So we have a very vibrant Better Buses campaign in South Yorkshire, another one. I know, Ellen, I think you're probably involved in the one in West Yorkshire, and that very much concentrated on exposing the alarming effects of bus deregulation and the deterioration in the quality of service, the frequency of service, the fact that some routes have been cut altogether, and calling for public investment, but in particular, a change in the way buses are run. We want to see buses brought back under public control as a first stage. So we're talking about a franchising system, which is actually what happened in London. London was never fully deregulated, mainly because of opposition from the Metropolitan Police, by the way. They realised the traffic chaos that was caused across the country, and they made very strong representation to Parliament that you couldn't get away with doing that in London. But so in London, you have a system where buses are run by private companies. They're contracted to run by the Transport for London Public Authority. And there are standards laid down. You know, the frequencies have to be such and such, the timetable such and such. And of course, they're all coloured in red. So you, as a passenger, you see that as one coherent network that's planned by the public authority. My Union Unite has produced a really important document, and I'll just hold it up to you, building a world-class bus system for Britain, which makes the case that whilst franchising is a better option, a much better option, it still doesn't match to bringing things back under public ownership, under municipal ownership where it belongs, because you're still paying private companies a profitable level of income in order to run those services on your behalf. And we know that, for instance, in London, the London ratepayer would be paying less if those services were run under public ownership. So the thrust of the campaign is obviously, the Better Buses campaign, that is obviously geared towards that future goal of a world-class system, properly funded under public ownership once more. We're also very much, and of course you will understand this as a Unite member, but I'm really pleased everybody else understands this. It also has to be about the workers who work in that industry. And if we're going to have a world-class system, we've also got to have very good standards of pay and conditions for those workers. What happened under deregulation and privatisation was very much downward pressure on wages and conditions, which led to the situation where the bus companies simply couldn't retain enough staff to run the services that they even wanted to run. We had a spell of cuts at the end of 2022, and the companies said it was because they had to match the level of services to the level of staffing that they were able to sustain on those rates of pay and conditions. And at least the one benefit from that is we weren't seeing quite so many bus services cancelled through lack of staff. But it's still a terrible indictment of the way the private companies have run the services. But we're convinced that if we can get people on board with this, and we could get a properly invested world-class bus system, we'd not only be helping the environment because we'd be getting people out of their cars, but we would be improving the quality of life for so many people. who are struggling at the moment with huge cost of living costs. But a properly subsidised fare system would be very, very helpful and attractive to people on no incomes, particularly young people trying to get to very low paid jobs. And there's far too many of them, as we know. But it also would have other benefits. For instance, air pollution costs. We know that public transport, it's a very easy system to make really green. We can look at green fuels. We can look at electric buses. We can look at even electric trolley buses as one of the options. But we could be improving air quality. And finally, just reducing traffic congestion. We know this has a huge impact on the economy, and to ease the flow of traffic in our cities, make transport of goods and people easier, is beneficial to the local economy as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. I think that was really informative and helpful for framing this discussion. So I think, I think definitely, the talk about better buses campaigns, they're doing some really interesting things across the region, across the region, but also the kind of focus that this is a climate issue and a union issue and everyone issue. Getting this right is better for society at large. It's better for taxpayers who don't care about the actual provision, but just pay about paying less tax. It's better for people who actually have to get places, and it's kind of better for that knock on as well. I wonder if anyone has any feedback or comments or additional bits that they'd want to add. Debbie?
Of course I have. I've been posting in the chat, and I was very shocked to hear Martin say there's nothing wrong with having a car, because even if they're electric, well, probably just as much if they're electric, it's a sort of green extractivism. It's not the right way to carry on. Private, it's ultimately privatized. So I think the trade union movement could be thinking along the lines of the Lucas plan. What could car workers do with their skills that would be more useful? And during COP26, I watched a video discussion that, they were making the point that every other kind of transport makes connections between people. And, in this sort of neoliberal atomized sort of society, that's what we need. Not people getting out of one box, the one they live in, into another box, the one they drive in, to go to the box they work in. If they're walking to the bus stop, they're meeting people. If they're sitting on the bus, they're chatting. That's a whole social fabric sort of thing as well. So I will post that thing because I think it's probably still worth watching. And, what public transport remains in the way of trains we need to defend. Of course, the buses. I mean, in York, the suburban buses are so peculiar. It's often faster to walk if you've had your bicycle nicked, as I have. So, I mean, I was brainwashed against cars as a student on the Pennine Way. We crossed the M62 construction site, and I haven't changed my feelings. I'd only drive, well, I'd have to learn to drive again, and I'd only do it in an emergency. But that's not just me. I think there are such huge health and social benefits, and Martin will know all about the clean air stuff up in Burngreave. We shouldn't have children with air pollution as their cause of death, like Ella Kissy Deborah. So basically, what can we do as trade unionists to have a Lucas plan for car workers, please?
Thanks. Let's go to Steve.
Thanks. I'm kind of a guest here because I'm from Sunderland, which is in the sort of north, and TUC hasn't quite caught up with us yet. So great to meet up with those people who are on the Green Reps course again. I hope everyone's doing great. Yeah, Martin, I thought it was fascinating what you said about the integrated transport plan. I'm involved in Jamie Driscoll's campaign. I've left the Labour Party to do that up in the northeast of England. And as you may or may not be aware, I don't know if anyone else is, that one of the cornerstones of his campaign is an integrated transport plan, a green transport plan, just transition, a good work pledge for the workers. It's going to be bringing lots of people, bringing lots of stuff back into public ownership, which is virtually what you're saying. I could have been talking to Jamie there, to be fair. I'm just thinking, I appreciate it's a different part of the region, and until the TUC all becomes one region, is there an opportunity there? Because we're all going to be knocking on doors, we're all going to be out having public meetings, we're all going to be putting literature out across this neck of the woods, the whole of the north region. Is there an opportunity there to get that message out? Because, like I say, I can't think of anything you've said that he wouldn't do if he was in power. To be fair, if we can get a socialist elected to power, yes, it's going to mean beating the Labour candidate, but I think that will be a huge opportunity for climate change throughout the region. I think we can make a huge impact. And again, it would be seismic, to be fair, beating a Labour candidate in the heartlands on a red-green platform, substantially to the left of a Blairite Labour. I think who's basically going to just keep the franchise as it goes, if you like. So I think it's an opportunity. I'm just thinking, have we thought of that as a campaign tactic?
I think, so the TUC from a organizational point of view, we have absorbed or partly absorbed the Northeast now, or maybe they've absorbed us, depending on which way you want to look around it. The remit so far is Yorkshire and Humber, but you're very welcome in this group. There's a lot more unites us than separates us. I think that's very interesting, and it's interesting that Jamie has made this such a key part of his campaign. It's also interesting if we're getting into sort of the politics side of it, that this has been a key part of other people's campaign as well, right? Andy Burnham has kind of brought a lot of integrated a lot of the transport into a single system with the B network in Manchester. It's obviously something that's going on under Tracy in West Yorkshire as well. And actually last night I was on a hustings for the new North Yorkshire Labour candidate for North Yorkshire, and the two candidates who Labour is going to pick one of both talked about transport as the main issue for York and North Yorkshire, that new combined area. And so it's obviously something that is very political. There is, as Martin said, a real problem of being hamstrung by what local authorities and what combined authorities can actually do here. They are all kind of moving towards the franchise thing as a stepping stone for hopefully getting this municipal controlled system in the future, but at the moment that's not really possible, right? So I wonder what we can do about that. I have a question. Is Better Buses operating up in the Northeast yet? That's a very successful campaign, or very loud campaign down here.
We've got a South Yorkshire group for Better Buses, and I think a West Yorkshire one as well.
Yeah, so maybe there's an opportunity if that's if it's a big issue up in the Northeast as well, that could potentially be expanded out there. Better Buses has, some people here are involved in that process, obviously, and maybe they can speak to this a bit more, but it has that kind of trade union link, right? Where it's appreciating that not only that it shares personnel with the trade union movement, but also that this is a union issue. Does anyone want to talk more about that?
Well, it's very much a union and climate and community-based coalition. And I think that's what's made it really effective. We certainly in South Yorkshire, we've had frequent but very good-natured rallies outside the mayor's office in Sheffield, the mayor for South Yorkshire, that is, who obviously has the responsibility for transport across South Yorkshire, a bigger role now than the individual town and city councils had prior to us having a regional mayor. The only snag has been because the private bus companies are so authoritarian and very, very restrictive on their employees, even their union reps. They would really come down on like a ton of bricks on any union rep that turned up to our rally and started criticising the private companies. So we've had the token support, if you like, but we've had the full-time officers definitely on board and have come to speak to our meetings. It's a reflection. The private companies are simply awful in terms of their threats to their workforce, even the union reps. If you speak out against us on social media, for instance, you will be instantly dismissed. And so that getting that active participation from the unions has been tricky, but it is nevertheless union policy to support franchising as a first step to municipal ownership. And to come to Steve's point, I mean, you know, in Yorkshire and Humber TUC, we've had, you know, AGM after AGM where we've completely 100% backed the Better Buses campaign. It's not a problem. You know, we support buses being brought back under public control as a first step towards public ownership. That's the policy that unions are bringing to the conference, that trades councils are bringing to the conference, and it's been adopted as TUC policy. So I don't see any problem at all with us supporting that. The only thing is, of course, for a TUC, it's going to keep a little bit of distance from, you know, Jamie Driscoll versus the Labour Party, no matter what all we as individuals might think about that. But, you know, I think we're all on the same breadth there. I mean, it is really unfortunate that the Labour Party is drifting away from the very policies which we're talking about. I mean, I know, for instance, my local MP, Louise Haigh, who is shadow transport, has publicly said, yes, under a Labour government, we will renationalise the railways. That's policy. She was then, you know, slapped down by Keir Starmer, who said, well, no, I don't think we will. So it's you know, absolutely shocking that we've got not only a Tory government that is, if not climate deniers, then certainly climate liars. You know, the idea that 100 new oil drilling licenses in the North Sea is not going to impact on our progress towards, you know, 2050, you know, zero goals. I mean, it's just a nonsense. But we've got a Labour Party that is saying we're going to drift away from that commitment to a £28 billion green agenda. So we can't escape the politics of individuals, but don't expect the TUC to come out and say that in terms of supporting Jamie Driscoll. What we all do as individuals is another matter. Can I just pick up Debbie's point about cars? I mean, obviously, you know, in an ideal world, we'll get to that point, Debbie, but I think we've got to be careful that we don't sound, I was going to use the word extreme. I don't mean extreme, that we're going too far too quickly for people and we can't take them with us. The real issue here is that you're not going to get people out of their cars or even think about giving up their cars until they can see a proper alternative in place. So I think the first job is to build a world-class bus system, a world-class public transport system generally, and that includes the railways. And that starts to get people to realise they can manage without a car. Then let's deal with the next stages. But we've got to be careful, I think, of sounding like we know what's best for everybody. Get rid of your cars. You know, you're terrible if you don't get rid of your cars. and you're going to turn people off. So there's stages in this argument. I hope one day we'll have a world in which we have, first of all, world-class public transport to get about, but we have a planning system that allows us much more localization, so there's less demand for travel. You know, there's so many more aspects to this than simply saying let's ban cars. And I don't think you were saying let's ban cars, but you know that it begins to sound like that. And I think that there's a better approach to getting to where we all want to be.
Thanks, Martin. I think that's a helpful counter to that position. There has been a bit of discussion in the chat as well, and I think Ellen was part of that. So maybe you'll fill us in on what's happening there.
Well, I did want to say a word in support of Debbie's point. Actually, despite I agree with a lot of what Martin's just said, but in order to get where we want to be in terms of a decent public transport system, we also need a massive campaign that involves a very large amount of the public. We need the public, the wider public, on board. That's not an intentional pun. And whenever you see this discussion on social media, because you see it a lot, some environmental group will talk about cutting fossil fuels, whatever, and you get a string of people underneath saying, well, I can't give up my car because I live in a rural area, or I've got this, I've got that. And the point that was made in the chat about actually cars also should be part of the public transport system, whether it's taxis, whether it's a socialized car share scheme for exceptional use, or for people who have very exceptional needs that can't, they're finding that they can't be met through the public transport system. Although probably the commonest one is, I live in a rural area and the buses only come once a week. Well, obviously, as Martin said, the buses should be accessible irrespective of whether you live in a remote area or whether it's a well-used route or not. That's the whole point of socializing, of collectivizing something, sorry. To say otherwise is to say, well, why should we have hospitals when only a minority of people get seriously ill? But if we actually include cars in the public transport system, if we say that taxis in rural areas, as needed, are part of this, you've got to. I suppose the point I'm making is that you've got to be able to anticipate and deal with those objections in order to be able to get enough of the public on board. I accept a lot of the time when you see those comments on Facebook and what have you, and people say, "Oh, well, that'll never happen," because a lot of it is just mischievous. It's people who just want to just want to trash anything that sounds like anything good, but unless you spell out all the possibilities, this is what I'm saying, I think, unless you spell out the possibilities, what we really want it to be like, what it really could be like, then you've got nothing with which to counter the arguments of people who say, yes, but what about this?
If I can come in with just how
Sure.
where we are today. My wife goes to a French evening class in the evenings. We live in one suburb. That class is in another suburb. You can't do that by public transport unless you're going to go into town on an infrequent service, just miss the connection, and then wait for nearly an hour for the bus out to that suburb. And that's going to take you probably an hour and 3/4, that journey, which could be done 10 minutes in the car. And unless we get round providing public transport that is attractive to use, you're falling on deaf ears if you're telling people we should all manage without our cars.
Well, yeah, but we haven't argued for telling people they should manage. I don't think anybody's actually argued that, have they? I think what my argument is that we have to present people with the full range of what's possible, so that if you need to go to somewhere, if you need to travel from one suburb to another for a social or an activity in the evening, that you can, that the system that we envisage is one where you can do that.
We would, yeah.
And where you can get transport, even if you live in the back of beyond and you need to get to another back of beyond.
Yeah, quite so.
And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? You know, this is not a debate in London, because the system works to large degree, right? You know, it just already is integrated, and so sure, people have cars and they use them on occasion, but the kind of more carbon friendly ways of traveling are a lot more attractive. We've got Debbie with a hand up, and then Simon.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, just on that last thing about London, I've just had to go down to London, all sorts of family crap going on. Their bus services are starting to get like ours up in Yorkshire. I mean, this neoliberal crap is really, really serious. My brother's got a whole analysis of that I won't bore you with. But, you know, they're coming for absolutely everything, the right wing are, the neoliberals. So, you know, London will suffer as well if we don't get a move on. Yes, Martin, I take your point. And I mean, I think the evening class issue, you know, if taxis and things like that were, you know, socialized cars that Ellen was talking about, is a way around that. And all of this, we can't be talking about 2050. We just cannot be thinking, oh, but we've got until 2050. If you could see me, I can't make the camera switch on, but, you know, there's a sort of emissions could go from the top left where we are now down to the bottom right of the graph. Are you with me? To reduce emissions. What we seem to be doing at the moment is going along the top of the graph and thinking we can do a cliff edge reduction in emissions just before 2050.
Yep.
Leading to all sorts of unenvisaged tipping points. You know, the clever way to reduce emissions would be to go very steeply down as soon as possible and then along the bottom. So then you get the shape of a leaf with the vein running across from the, you know, the diagonal of the graph. Are you with me? And if you imagine a leaf with the vein going top left to bottom right, you know, worst case scenario, cliff edge, that's the top of the leaf. Best thing coming along the bottom, because if you remember, you know, like, then we cut out all those emissions in the middle there, you know, and that stuff, you know, we are the polluting elite in the global north, roughly. I know there's global north riches, you know, rich people in the global south as well. But we have to think all that. And I mean, what we're bequeathing future generations beggars belief. The other thing is, of course, a lot of people, their car is not for getting from A to B. It's for showing off. It's all sorts of, you know, Freudian substitutes. Yeah. It's a spare room where they keep a load of junk in the back. You know, it is not a vehicle like my, you know, mourning my bike for about a fortnight, you know. But I mean, there's all that sort of impedimenta around that consumerist, aspirational showing off thing about having a car as well to deal with. Anyway, I think we have to try to be the change we want to see. Think about how you can prefigure what could be, you know, wider. You haven't answered my thing about the Lucas plan idea, but you know, try and get things set up that work, and yeah, have the arguments politely, of course. I thought I was among friends and I could just sound off, you know.
No, you definitely are, Debbie. Thank you. That's helpful. Let's yeah, Simon.
Oh, okay. What I've found since the pandemic has ended is there is more homeworking that's been becoming a reality of life in our society even before the pandemic, and that's something we want to push for as part of not to be acknowledged in a transport plan, but also acknowledged in general. If people can work from home, it does mean less transport use, so potentially less transport emissions. And it's still something for us to campaign about to support, because currently we're probably going to sound off against the Tories today, but the Tories want loads of workers, including civil servants like me, to work in the office all the time and at home less. And they're often justified for spurious reasons, but it's that kind of stuff that we need to challenge on the environmental basis. Well, I don't know if this has ever been done before, because from what's been mentioned so far, is you want to have an integrated transport system involving everything. Well, it may be interesting to see what is actually presented by the Climate Commission and feedback on it after this is an ongoing thing. But for the Yorkshire area, you need buses, rail, car use, cycle use, because there has been work done on cycling as well for a number of people, to be considered along with walking as part of a transport plan. Obviously you want more investment in buses and rails, but you do need to consider all of it. I think we are going to have to get the balance right here. Debbie, for some people, I know it's not just an accessory or linked to consumerism. For some people I know are working parents, they find they can't do everything they need to do to meet their work commitments and also care for all their children and get them to school and after school clubs and other things. By relying on public transport, they find they need their cars more to do all that. So we still have to acknowledge where we're starting from now, which is still a reliance on private car use. It may not be acknowledged, but in practice, for a lot of working people I know, that's the unfortunate reality we have to start from. We can't just. It's not just about consumerism, but I mean it's for some, but it's not for everybody. And that's why I think I agree with Martin's arguments. We do need to. If we moralise too much about it, we're not going to get all the successes we need, as Al said. So that's what I would add. If you want to do, we want to support home working as part of a transport plan as well. Cheers.
Thanks. I think that's really important input, especially with the home working side, because yeah, we are in a position where people's traveling patterns have changed, and how they can move around has obviously changed as well. And Martin, you sort of opened with that in a way, talking about stuff 40 years ago now. You know, we are in a different position to we are then. And I guess part of this is trying to work out, well, is that because it was deregulated and we've kind of moved everything into a neoliberal space, and so necessarily it's degraded the public transport, or is that a trajectory that was already in the offing in society, and so is it just being realized under a privatized system? You know, what point can we get back to in many ways? Ellen, do you want to come in?
Yeah, there are a few things I wanted to say, actually, if I can remember all of them. The first is it's just something that was triggered by the mention of a Lucas plan, which obviously is, you know, that's a positive approach, but we have to be careful that we don't get narrowly sectoral about this, and, you know, just be thinking about repurposing of existing skills and tools and what have you, because if we're in an existential emergency, and where we need to be looking at it is in a sense from the other end. What is the workforce that we actually need to get us out of this horror, you know, quickly enough? What is the workforce, the size of workforce, and where does that workforce need to be deployed? For example, and I keep saying this, we've got virtually no skilled labour on the land, for example, and we need a sustainable food system. You know, we all know the arguments about the millions of people that we need working on retrofitting buildings and things, and the fact that we've got so few people skilled to do that. You know, if we look at it from that perspective, I'm not sure how it kind of works out in terms of transport, whether you need more people to run a common sense suggests that you need more people to run a public transport system than you do to build cars. But you know, I don't know enough about the details to be able to argue that. But you know, we've got to be looking at what's the workforce that we need and taking it from that end and really arguing for that, because without those you know, retrofit specialists, without those without those you know, regenerative farmers or whatever, but without all those people, we are absolutely stuffed, and people need to understand that, you know, how much danger we're in. That's the one thing I want to say. So in a way, we need to be, you know, just careful not to be too narrow in the way that we think about transition. I know it's a very tricky thing to you know, to talk about, but we've got to grasp the nettle. I think that we can't keep on pussyfooting around that issue. Some sectors need to grow, some sectors need to contract, as well as decarbonising and transitioning in terms of technologies. Yeah, I was going to say something about, yeah, the way, when we're talking about transport, it's partly it's about how we move, the technologies of how we move, isn't it? But partly it's also about why we move, and this has been touched on already. You know, people are working too many days a week, yeah, arguably. People are travelling too far to get to their work. We need to be able to relocalise where people work and how people work, and home working is a part of that, although, you know, we have to be wary of the kind of, you know, how many people are we isolating in the home unwillingly, you know, by doing that. But what always comes to mind for me is, and I think this is something that the most unions on the whole don't pay enough attention to, is the role of well, the role of the benefits system, which is becoming more and more and more harsh on particularly single parents of young children. I was a single parent of a young child, and I was allowed to claim state support, collectivized, you know, not it wasn't a lot, but, you know, until that child was old enough to, you know, leave school or whatever. You know, now it's gone down and down and down, so that you've got to work if the child's 3, and you've got to be looking for work when they're 2, and you've got to be going for interviews when they're, and the same thing's happening to people with disabilities that are out of work as well. And this whole system and the sanctions that back it up, and I've said this so many times, but it's all about depressing wages and conditions in the wage sector, forcing people into shit jobs on pain of having all the support removed. It's not good for children. It's not good for, you know, it's completely disregarding all the reproductive labour that so many of us do in the home to produce the next generation of workers and, you know, keep them healthy and well socialised. It's you know, it's wrong on so many levels. And this is one of the, if you're a single parent in that position, let's say you've got a child at nursery, a child at school, and you're having to work a couple of part-time jobs to satisfy the DWP, you're not really going to get round all those commitments without having a car. It's time that people are so time poor, and when you're time poor, you just go for whatever's the quickest option. And that driving isn't always the quickest, of course, because who wants people sit in traffic jams for hours every day? But we've got to be campaigning for more time, and we've got to be campaigning for recognition that people work in the home in their caring roles, and that we collectively have to support that, instead of this nonsensical adult worker model where everybody's, you know, the only function of any human being is to be out there earning a wage, however shit that wage might be. So yeah, there's just, you know, all these things feed into it, and I think it's a real challenge to the trade union movement to actually, you know, bring these things within its scope, because obviously it's you know, it's emerged as a thing that's about within workplace issues. But I think that has to, the boundaries of that have to be pushed out.
I think that's helpful. Thank you. And I think it's helpful to universalize this as well, to recognize that we're talking about a series of societal problems and long-term problems, not only transport or, whether we should all stop using our cars. What I would like to do, we're going to come to Steve and then Debbie, but it would be useful, and I think you've sort of nicely segued into it there, to think about, as trade unionists, what we can practically do to put forward this agenda. And then, I mean, I'm aware that people on this and people who will be watching the recording are in workplaces, and so we'll be wanting to think about, workplace specific actions. And so maybe we could think about those as we answer the questions as well. So Steve, do you want to come in and maybe pick up some of that stuff as well?
Yeah, I mean, just some great points off Ellen there. I think the way I sort of saw that was everybody seems to be talking about growth. Every political party, I think apart from the Greens perhaps, but everyone's talking generally about growth, which is essentially buying stuff you don't need with money you probably haven't got anyway. So we need to change that mindset and actually get aware that is a driver of climate change, and that is one of the big things, and we need to change the mindset. So I think it's what activities we can do, what message, what events we can put on to get that message out, because that's a huge thing, because the whole establishment is geared to this 2% inflation every year to make sure things keep working. So that's a massive change, and whether the transport's a part of that degrowth, also your 4-day week can be a part of that degrowth, your union rights, your welfare rights, and all kind of comes together under that heading as well to a certain extent. My final point would be another huge driver, which I think we sometimes shy away from as a massive driver of climate change, is war. I mean, the car I've got sitting on the drive is going to use nowhere near the amount of petrol in a year that a Merkava or a Leopard tank is going to be using in the next week and a half. So I think it's about putting that in perspective. How much fuel does a frigate in the Mediterranean have to use? And again, that takes away from the production, all that carry on. But I think these are I think if we don't lose sight of the big strategic issues, but I think we've got to concentrate and shift. We don't have to shift public opinion as well as tactically, if you like. Doing these Better Buses campaigns, supporting individuals for where we think they can advance the cause. But I think, as I say, it's important not to lose sight of those big issues, and that's why I loved. And I'll go back to the Green Reps course, Sam. I mean, we had those great presenters from Sweden. That was just that was their mindset. You're thinking of growth all the time. This is all you're thinking about. It's not about that. You've got to think of a different way of doing things, and it's getting that degrowth message out there, and not for people not to be frightened of it.
Thanks, Steve. Let's go to Joe.
Hi. Sorry, I joined late, so apologies if I'm mentioning a couple of things that have already been talked about. Just to say, I'm a Unite rep at the University of Leeds, and one of the things that we've just passed here in our school is a slow travel policy. So one of the biggest source of emissions that we have is obviously staff, academics travelling, to conferences worldwide. Now, there's lots of discussion about not doing that now that it's possible to do conferencing, in a different way. So that's been part of the discussion, to saying to people, please think first before you book a long haul flight. But also trying to move to an approach where, a bit like the sort of French model, whereby if you can make a journey through public transport, and all the issues that you've raised before, that's a big if for a lot of people, but it's if it can be done, then it will be supported that you do that, and you might need extra time to do that. So that's a massive shift in our organisation's thinking about how people move from A to B. So I can keep you updated in terms of that's just being passed. So how it actually works in practice and how people receive it is a massive task for us now, in terms of people at the top of the tree is like. They think it's their right to travel first class halfway around the world. So, you know, there's work to do on that, but also in terms of shorter journeys and just encouraging people to think about how they make those journeys. So that's one thing. And the second thing, Steve, really interested to hear about the course. I'm at this group partly with my rep hat on, and also partly we do research on just transition. One of the projects that we're doing that Sam knows well about, because he's just done a podcast for us, and our research is we're looking at just transition across many different types of countries. And my colleague Vera was just speaking to IG Metall in Germany, and they've been having training on degrowth for the last 10 to 12 years. It's a course that they run regularly, and they've been reporting that it's fully oversubscribed. So whilst the union's official position does not mention degrowth, that there are a lot of reps now across all different kinds of sectors that IG Metall organise in that are familiar with these arguments, and there is a sort of grassroots swelling of opinion of exactly the points that you've raised. So if there's anything we can do to sort of share resources and think about how we can also develop that conversation within our unions, I'd be really interested to think about how we do that.
Thanks, Joe. That's very interesting. Ellen put in the chat whether we should.
Thanks.
Thanks. Ellen put in the. Can people hear me? Yeah. Put in the chat about whether we have a sort of group on this to discuss degrowth. It's a big topic that's been just touched on here, but that would be very interesting. On that slow travels side, I think this is very interesting, and it's something that people could take to their individual branches, right? If they are in workplaces, to think about. I remember seeing something a couple of years ago that was a kind of ready-made policy set up as if to plug into an HR holiday policy, where you essentially could take an extra holiday day if it was going to take longer to take the train rather than fly. It was quite an interesting idea. It was raised that it means it's normally a benefit for people who are earning more, because they tend to take longer journeys or have more holiday provision or fly more than people who can't afford to do that. And so there is obviously a debate there, but it would be really interesting to see how it works out in the University of Leeds. So yeah, do keep us posted on that, Joe. That would be great. Debbie, you've got a hand up.
Oh, good, because I thought I might have put it down by accident. While Steve was on and hello, Steve, and nice to see you. When you started to talk about degrowth, my mind had gone off onto donut economics, because every time I go to Imagine in Leeds, there's more and more about the Leeds donut, which seems to me a positive spin around this, not having a Nike tick of growth, but having a circle where people can meet. So, a socially just world within planetary boundaries, which I'm not sure exactly where that meshes with degrowth. But I think it's a positive spin on all of that, that we should be having a socially just world that respects the borders of the. So that was what my mind had gone off onto, could we organise a panel discussion around the concept of the donut, and whether that is something, somebody else in York is quite interested. In fact, 3 of us went to the Leeds 2030 or whatever it was, the donut day stuff that week of events. So, and I know it goes beyond trade unions, and we're here as trade unionists, but we've been talking a lot about how we need to sort of reach out to everybody that might be jumping in a car, whether they're trade union members or not, And I mean, I can't stick to just talking about transport, because it's also interconnected. But I support the idea of talking about degrowth and just maybe include the donut within that. Is that, I don't know what other people think. Thank you. I put my hand down.
Thanks, Debbie. I think that's really good, and I think in many ways they're sort of the same concept or two sides of a related coin, aren't they? Right. So I think discussion on that would be an interesting thing to talk about. There's a little bit of that in the chat already as to what we do, whether we call it degrowth or whatever else we think about. But it's definitely a thing. To pick up on something someone said earlier, I was speaking to someone in Rotherham who has to travel from job to job in the local authority in their car as part of their job, and they said, well, look, I don't want to do that, I'm driving too much. I'd prefer to use public transport or cycle. I've got a bike and it's actually often easier to get around. The local authority there, maybe it wasn't Rotherham, it was somewhere, made a complete fuss about this, and it was very, very difficult for them to get that agreement. It was kind of built in that they would have that car and that they would have that regularity to their kind of diary, that it would be expected how long they'd be able to get from A to B. And so they kind of raised it as a union issue, and I think this was quite an interesting case. And so they've made an exception to their policy that essentially they can travel by bike or public transport, however, and that might mean doing fewer appointments, or it might be doing more appointments depending on the layout of these things. But the fact that was such a fight and something they really had to spend a lot of time working with their reps to get through, I think is very interesting. And it's not something that we're seeing a huge amount of in trade union branches, in workplaces, but it would be very interesting to see how that developed a bit more. I wonder if anyone has any thoughts here in the last kind of 10-15 minutes of our meeting about what we can do there, what particular campaigns or particular resources maybe that people could use or find helpful to take the issue of transport or the kind of issues that we've discussed today and make individual workers or groups of workers' lives better. We will also definitely have a conversation about donut economics and things. The chat is very keen on this. Martin?
Well, first of all, can I just say a fascinating discussion that arose out of it. My introduction about simply developing public transport led to some fascinating responses, and it does, I think, show how interconnected all these issues are, and transport does somehow sit at the heart of that. It's about how we move, how we live, and what sort of world we want to have at the end of it. But let's not lose sight of some very clear green objectives that we can articulate around transport. There's a huge potential to create desperately needed good green jobs. This is a very well trade unionized sector. So people entering into public transport in the main get introduced to trade unionism. In the main, they will come under a trade union collective bargaining agreement. And although, pay and conditions are not nearly as good as I'd like them to be, they tend to be better than those bum jobs which many young people are finding themselves having to go into in, for instance, the hospitality sector. And we have the potential to organise and improve upon that. Very interesting Unite victory on the buses up in Go Northeast just recently. A long run of victories as unionised workers fight back. So that's one thing, the huge potential for good new green jobs in this field, just like we've argued in retrofit, insulation on people's homes, if that was done under local authority workforce, a similar sort of argument. And I think that what I would ask people to do is get involved in the campaigns that exist. And perhaps, Steve, up there in the Northeast, if you don't have a Better Buses campaign, look to see if you can create one, because they've actually been very interesting trade union link-ups with community organisations, with climate activists. And they've been very vibrant campaigns and very, very popular. When we've taken street stalls, out into the public areas of the city centre, very, very good responses from the public. Better public transport is actually a very popular issue. And there's so much political education that comes around from that. You're talking about capitalism and private enterprise failing us. You're talking about, a government that is not funding public services properly. You're talking about deprivation of the people on low incomes who don't have access to transport and therefore don't have access to jobs, to healthcare, and so on. There's so much, I think, that spins off from it, as well as the sort of discussions we've had today about what a carless society might look like in the future. What's the pattern of work today? With less people actually traveling to work, and what's the way we should organise all that? So there's lots of spin-offs, but it's important, nevertheless, I think, to focus on the benefits of investing in a world-class public transport system. And by that, I would include rail as well as our local bus systems, and that they would have to be publicly owned and planned and controlled, and properly funded in order to make that work properly. And we would all benefit if we achieved that.
Thanks, Martin. Definitely worth repeating. We've not got that much time left, so let's try and be quick. Ellen.
Yeah, just backtracking a little bit, not disagreeing with anything that's just been said. Actually, just going back to the what this bit of chat about degrowth and the donut thing made me think is that one aspect of that is, what is the relationship between the sort of work that's being done by organisations like in Leeds, for example, Climate Action Leeds, but these kinds of initiatives exist probably in most cities that are more based on on quite a localist kind of model, but often involve like, for instance, if a group of people started a co-op for car sharing, for example, let's say, or a co-op for learning retrofit skills and help, doing that on a hyper local basis as a group of residents, whatever it might be. What's the relationship between that kind of initiative and the kinds of policy directed campaigns that we're talking about, which and that trade would be natural territory for trade unionists? Because what I see is often quite an unfortunate kind of silo thing going on, where you get different approaches going on in different milieus, which is obviously, nothing wrong with that in itself, but I think sometimes it's important to think about the connections between those. And sometimes people will argue that those community initiatives almost that they become elitist and they run counter to policy based campaigns and things, but they, yeah, we don't have time to talk about all that now, but I just think that that's one of the things that's raised, because the donut economics idea has come out of yes, it is, it is a policy thing, but it's come out of a milieu that is more about the local projects and that sort of thing. Do people understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to remember that there are those two sides to it. Not to dismiss everything else you said, but just to follow up on that last point. Joe.
Hi everyone. Yeah, just the point I wanted to make. You asked Sam what that you think people would need. I'd be really interested in thinking about in if anybody's got any experiences of introducing this notion of, as I said, degrowth is a rubbish term, and I totally agree what you say, Ellen, that we capitalism creates a lot of these problems. But ultimately, if we're thinking about engaging unions and unionists, they're obviously operating within this context. So how do and have they been successful in kind of, I guess, negotiating for good green jobs? Normally, that is, you know, a really fundamental thinking about negotiation is growth and the proceeds from growth and how we get an equal distribution of those. Well, you've got to completely rethink how you negotiate if you're trying to move to a sort of a more broader base of thinking, and that's a difficult challenge. So I'd be interested if people have got examples, or if you think it would be useful to think of ways in which on the ground, in terms of the dialogue that goes on about decent green jobs, people who are in positions of negotiation are either grappling with successfully or unsuccessfully with some of these notions of you know, the themes that we've been talking about today. Because I'm interested in how we might do that more successfully here in our organisation, and I don't know if other people have got examples of it.
Definitely. This is something that I'd be very keen to find as well. In the TUC, we're trying to put together a sort of catalogue or a suite of examples of these of green reps doing green rep things, and we have not got that many examples as yet. So if anyone does have those examples or wants to shout about what they've done, then definitely get in touch and we'll write up a case study. I'm sure you've got stuff, Joe, from your own experience and from your research. But yeah, more the merrier there. I'll keep you posted as these develop. Dave, did you have something you wanted to add, even if it?
Not really. I just been sort of listening away here. I just to put my little sort of 2 pennies worth in to the debate. Obviously, I work out of a diesel van. That's my industry. I can't do anything but work out of a van. I can't get a bus with my tools, and we're having massive problems at the moment trying to electrify. I think with Centric, the parent company who I work for, have put a commitment to the industry that they'll fully electrify by 2025. But the infrastructure is not there. We're finding it pretty much impossible to fully electrify at the moment. So it doesn't seem like low-hanging fruit to electrify car and van usage. I think there was a study that said that, you know, on a personal car compared to a petrol or diesel car, I think it gives half the impact. An electrical car has half the impact of a petrol or diesel car. Well, I think when you go to like a heavy loaded van, I think the environmental impact's almost something like it has like almost 80%. There's hardly any difference between an electric vehicle and a diesel or petrol carrying powered vehicle at the moment. So there have been massive problems there. I don't think we're actually doing any good other than depleting the world of its resources before we're ready to do it. I just wonder whether we should put pressure on industry to try and do more, to try and get the infrastructure better and the technology moving quicker. Because some of the debate right at the start was that we don't have the skills either. The skills shortage is massive, and obviously that's an increase in travel. So we try and change an estate or retrofit an estate and fit heat pumps or something like that. We have to drag the skill from other areas because that's where the skill is. So we actually increase the impact by traveling to those areas, and we obviously have to travel with the tools, so we can't take a train or a plane. It's very hard to try and decarbonize the transport part of our industry, even though the actual industry is trying to go as green as possible and everything's geared towards reducing environmental impact. It's actually got an environmental impact in itself, and I think that'll only increase because, as we say, we've got the skills shortage, and we've got a hole in our bucket, and as we try and fill the bucket with skill, we lose more than we put in. So it's a massive debate. I'm not sure it's the lowest hanging fruit, the transport side at the moment, in terms of personal use, not public use. That's all.
Thanks, Dave. No, that's really helpful reminder that, and sort of framing device in a way to think about everything that we've talked about today. And it's come up a few times, that kind of, there isn't only one solution to this, and that transport is obviously a big complicated mess of a thing.
Well, just as a really good example, we've got a meeting over in Stockport. A couple of reps have got a meeting in Stockport next week with some of the managers in the business, and the heavy loaded vehicles that we have, because of all the tools and the wind resistance, the ladders and things, we can't even get to Stockport from Elgin Wakefield, so we can't get to Stockport and back on a fully charged battery. So if you can imagine that, I think it's 60 miles, so 120 miles. We can't even do that in a full charge. So the impact of charging in the day, you can't get as much work done. So then it has a cost to the business, and it actually increases the cost over diesel vehicles. So then if you impact the time and the diesel cost on a business, the move to charging is from electric vehicles from fossil fuel vehicles is just impossible. The infrastructure is just not there. The technology is not there. God knows what the value will be of the second-hand vehicles when they come to be replaced. Because if you see a normal, I mean, as I work, I don't travel very often in my van. So when you sell a van, end of its life, it hasn't got 100,000 miles or something like that. It's only got 20 or 30,000 miles after sort of 5-6 years of use. But I can't see the value being very high, because nobody who's not a tradesman, any couriers or anything like that, couldn't use these vehicles for doing what they do. They just haven't got the range. So it's almost like if the batteries can't be recycled, or the age on the batteries has a half-life of something like 10 years, it's just a waste of resource. It's just a waste of minerals and materials mining out of the ground. And the impact we're having on that as well, the impact we're having by mining this stuff as well, and the human impact in the countries we're getting the materials from is a huge issue as well. So it's just an absolute quandary at the moment. I think we're trying to run before we can walk with electric vehicles, to be honest.
Thanks. That's yeah, I think that's quite apt. We are out of time, so I'll wrap it up here. But thank you very much for everyone's contribution, especially Martin for kicking us off on that. I think it's really helpful to have quite a broad-ranging discussion there and see the variety of opinions and think about what we can do. I'll get this sorted out and get some minutes out so that people can link into those events that we talked about earlier. I'll also just plug that I think we should do a bit of collaboration between these events as well. So I'm going to book in a new one for the new year, but I'll also send some bits through, and maybe we can contribute and feedback and pass these documents around. I'm thinking for the cheat sheet that was mentioned last time, and also we're developing a policy paper on retrofit, which I think that people here would be really helpful to get your feedback on what that looks like. Before it goes to the printers. So more on that to follow. But if anyone has any further topics or interest or any topics for future discussions, let us know. I think we'll definitely have to do one on donut economics, and we'll have to consult the list of expertise ahead of that as well. But thank you all for coming. I'll speak to you next time.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Cheerio, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, is Ellen still there?
Thanks, Sam.
No. Okay. Never mind. Thanks very much. Bye for now. How do I get out of here?